November 2008, NP Aerospace Factory, Foles Hill Road, Coventry. The foreman stands beside an American vehicle that arrived in a C-17 transport aircraft 3 months earlier, blank steel. Unpainted, built in Ladson, South Carolina, by a company called Force Protection Industries. Across the factory floor, another 50 identical hulls wait their turn under the cold light of an October morning. The deadline is impossible. The Ministry of Defense wants this vehicle, and 150 others like it, stripped, armoured, wired with British radios, and shipped to Afghanistan by the following summer. It looked borrowed. It looked second-hand. It was a vehicle bought off an American production line named after an African hunting dog, designed for a war being fought by the United States Marine Corps on the other side of the world. Over the next 5 years, this vehicle would carry British infantry through the most heavily mined districts of Helmand Province. It would survive pressure plate detonations that tore its wheels from their axles. It would push into compound alleys the Mastiff could not enter, and absorb blasts the Snatch Land Rover had never been built to face. By the time British combat operations in Afghanistan ended in October 2014, it had become the backbone of protected mobility for every British infantry company operating outside the wire. Its designation was the Ridgeback Protected Patrol Vehicle, and it was the compromise that kept British soldiers alive when the vehicle they had been issued with had already killed 37 of them. To understand why the Ridgeback existed, you need to understand what had gone wrong between 2004 and 2008. The British Army's standard patrol vehicle was the Snatch Land Rover, built in the 1990s to survive rocks, bricks and petrol bombs thrown at security forces in Northern Ireland. Its armour was thin aluminium plate, effective against small arms fire and nothing else. In Iraq, insurgents began burying roadside bombs in culverts and verges. The Snatch offered no protection whatever against blast from below. Soldiers began calling it the mobile coffin. By December 2008, 37 British service personnel had been killed in Snatch Land Rovers across Iraq and Afghanistan. The figure was confirmed to Parliament by Defence Secretary John Hutton on the 16th of that month. Among them was Corporal Sarah Bryant of the Intelligence Corps, the first British servicewoman killed in Afghanistan, who died with 3 reservists from the Special Air Service when their Snatch detonated a pressure plate device east of Lashkar Gah on the 17th of June 2008. The Ministry of Defence had already moved. On the 1st of May 2008, Force Protection Industries of Ladson, South Carolina, received a contract worth up to $91.5 million American dollars for 151 Cougar 4x4 vehicles. The Cougar was an American mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle, already in service with the United States Marine Corps in Iraq. Its defining feature was a V-shaped monocoque hull, a single steel plate bent into a keel that ran the full length of the vehicle and deflected blast energy laterally away from the crew compartment. Britain had already bought the larger 6-wheeled version of this vehicle in 2006, named it Mastiff, and watched it survive roadside bomb strikes in southern Iraq and Helmand. The Ridgeback was to be its lighter sister, a version that could squeeze into the narrow Afghan compound alleys. Mastiff was too wide to enter. The vehicle itself was a masterpiece of borrowed engineering made British. At NP Aerospace in Coventry, under an £81 million integration contract, each Cougar 4x4 was stripped and rebuilt. Onto the bare American hull went a proprietary multi-hit composite armour package called KMAC, developed in-house. Onto the outside went bar armour cages, designed to detonate rocket-propelled grenades before they reached the hull plate. Inside went Bowman tactical radios, classified British electronic countermeasures for defeating radio-controlled roadside bombs, and a Silex Galileo indirect vision system that fed panoramic camera feeds into screens inside the sealed cabin. The driver could operate the vehicle with every hatch closed. The specifications that mattered: combat weight of 19.5 tons, 9 tons lighter than Mastiff, length of 5.92 metres, width of 2.59 metres, narrow enough for Helmand village lanes, a Caterpillar C7 turbodiesel engine producing 330 horsepower, an Allison 6-speed automatic transmission, top speed of 55 miles per hour, range of 420 miles, crew of 2, with capacity for up to 6 dismounted infantry in the armoured rear compartment. Armament options included the 7.62mm general-purpose machine gun, the 12.7mm heavy machine gun, or the 40mm grenade machine gun. 40 vehicles were fitted with the Silex Enforcer remote weapon station, allowing the commander to engage targets from inside the armoured cabin without exposing a gunner to fire. The result was the first truly survivable British patrol vehicle since the start of the Iraq War. Now, before we get into where this vehicle actually fought, if you are enjoying this deep dive into British engineering under pressure, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. The first Ridgebacks flew into Camp Bastion in April 2009. They entered operational service with 19 Light Brigade in June. Their arrival coincided, almost to the day, with the launch of the largest British offensive of the entire Afghan campaign. Operation Panther's Claw opened on the 19th of June 2009. The 3rd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, the Black Watch, conducted a night air assault into the Babaji district north of Lashkar. Over the following 6 weeks, the 1st Battalion of the Welsh Guards pushed along the Shamalan Canal. The Light Dragoons and the 2nd Battalion of the Mercian Regiment drove a ground assault through the compound belts east of Nad Ali. 10 British soldiers were killed across the operation. The Ridgeback's job in Panther's Claw was not glamorous. It carried infantry section groups forward to their dismount points. It escorted Husky logistics trucks along the ring road. It held blocking positions on compound corners, while dismounted infantry cleared buildings. It absorbed the attention of Taliban spotters and triggermen whose pressure plates were tuned for the heavier Mastiffs and did not detonate under the lighter vehicle. Operation Mushtarak followed in February 2010, a combined NATO and Afghan assault into Nad Ali and Marja, the largest coalition operation of the war up to that point. Ridgebacks formed the protected mobility backbone of the British framework forces committed to the offensive. Through the next 4 years of Operation Herrick rotations, they served with every British infantry battalion deployed to Helmand, the Parachute Regiment, the Royal Marines, the Rifles, the Mercian Regiment, the Royal Welsh, the Grenadier Guards, the Scots Guards, the Yorkshire Regiment. Every compound cluster in Sangin, Musa Qala, Nar-e-Sarraj, Gereshk, and Lashkar Gah was patrolled from the armoured cabin of a Ridgeback at some point during the war. The vehicle's combat record is measured not by kills claimed, but by kills denied. The Mastiff and Ridgeback family, according to multiple Ministry of Defence statements, went years in theatre before a fatality inside the hull was recorded. Crews survived pressure plate strikes that tore wheels from their axles, flipped the vehicle onto its side and left the hull smoking in a crater. The V-shaped monocoque did what its designers had promised. It redirected the blast wave outward and upward around the sealed crew compartment rather than into it. Accounts from returning British infantry described Ridgebacks that had taken pressure plate detonations hard enough to lift the vehicle clear of the ground, rip tyres from their hubs, and leave the crew concussed but walking. These incidents rarely made the news because there were no funerals attached to them. The Ridgeback's most important battlefield statistic was the silence that followed each strike. The numbers told another part of the story. In December 2009, a Freedom of Information disclosure revealed that only 73 of 118 Ridgebacks delivered to 11 Light Brigade were rated fit for purpose, roughly 60%. The other 40% were down for spares, dust ingestion, or battle damage repair. Liberal Democrat defence spokesman Willie Rennie called the figures worrying. The Ministry of Defence argued that no armoured fleet in any theatre could sustain a higher operational rate. Both statements were true. The Ridgeback had limitations commanders learned to work around. At 19.5 tonnes, it crushed culverts and narrow mud bridges that lighter vehicles cleared safely. This in turn channeled patrols onto predictable routes. Taliban bomb makers quickly identified the handful of crossings heavy enough to carry it and concentrated their efforts there. The vehicle's high centre of gravity made rollovers on soft shoulders a genuine risk. Its 2.59-metre width still defeated the narrowest compound lanes, forcing dismounts earlier than officers would have liked, and yet the Taliban adapted to its presence in a way they had never adapted to the Snatch. Intelligence intercepts captured insurgent commanders instructing their teams to let the Ridgebacks pass, to target only the dismounted infantry who followed them. By late 2010, the standard insurgent response to a Ridgeback patrol entering a compound cluster was to melt into the civilian population and wait. The vehicle had achieved what the Snatch never did. It had made British mounted movement in the most heavily mined terrain on the planet, something insurgents avoided rather than hunted. Foreign service followed. Upgraded Ridgebacks were deployed to Mali in 2021 under Operation Newcomb with the United Nations Stabilization Mission, patrolling across terrain and threat profiles entirely different from Helmand. Sand, long desert roads, fewer compounds, more open ambush country. Crews fitted with independent suspension, central tyre inflation, and larger Michelin off-road tyres carried out the same mission they had been doing a decade earlier in different dirt. On paper, the Ridgeback was one of the most expensive patrol vehicles Britain had ever fielded. Each integrated vehicle cost close to £1 million once NP Aerospace work was factored in. The Snatch Land Rover it replaced had cost roughly £30,000. The Foxhound Light protected patrol vehicle that would eventually replace the Ridgeback in light rolls cost around £400,000. But cost per vehicle is a peacetime measurement. In wartime, the relevant metric is cost per life saved. By that measure, the Ridgeback was the cheapest vehicle in the British infantry. Against its contemporaries, It sat in a specific tactical niche, heavier than the Jackal open-topped Raider, lighter than the Mastiff-protected patrol vehicle, better protected than the Foxhound, narrower than the Wolfhound tactical support vehicle. It was the answer to a question the British Army had not been forced to ask since Northern Ireland. What protection level does a standard infantry patrol vehicle need when the enemy has access to military-grade explosives and radio-controlled initiation? The answer, in engineering terms, was approximately 20 tons of V-hulled steel with composite overlay. In the summer of 2013, the Ridgeback was formally brought into the British Army's core equipment fleet as part of the Army 2024 structure. 3 infantry battalions were mechanised into heavy protected mobility units built around Mastiffs, Ridgebacks, and Wolfhounds. This was a significant departure from standard practice. Urgent operational requirement equipment was normally disposed of at campaign end. The Ridgeback had earned permanent status through performance in the field. Most of the fleet recovered to the Ministry of Defence storage site at Ashchurch in Gloucestershire after the end of Operation Herrick in October 2014. Between 2019 and 2022, NP Aerospace carried out an off-road mobility upgrade under the Protected Mobility Engineering and Technical Support contract, adding independent suspension, central tyre inflation, and larger off-road tyres. In July 2020, Procurement Minister Jeremy Quinn announced that the combined Mastiff, Ridgeback and Wolfhound fleets, around 733 vehicles in total, would be retired under the Land Environment Fleet Optimisation Plan. The Boxer mechanised infantry vehicle, an 8-wheeled German design, would replace them in the heavy protected mobility role. Foxhound would inherit the light patrol function. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, significant numbers of retired British protected mobility vehicles were transferred to Ukrainian forces: Mastiffs, Wolfhounds, Huskies, a smaller number of Ridgebacks. The vehicles Britain had bought to save its own soldiers in Helmand now served in a different war, against a different enemy, on ground their designers never imagined. November 2008, NP Aerospace Factory, Foleshill Road, Coventry. The Ridgeback was never supposed to exist in British service. It was an American vehicle, built in South Carolina for a different war. It was heavy. It was expensive. It was a stopgap. It was a compromise forced on a Ministry of Defence that had sent soldiers into Helmand in Land Rovers designed to survive 1990s Belfast. It crushed bridges. It channeled patrols. It could not reach the narrowest compound lanes. It burned fuel at a rate that made logisticians weep. And yet it worked. It worked in Babaji. It worked in Nadali. It worked in Sangin, in Musakala, in Gereshk, in Marja. It worked when the Snatch would have failed. It carried British infantry into the most mined terrain of the 21st century, and it carried them home. It was borrowed. It was bought in haste. It was British only in the armour plate bolted over the American hull. And it worked when it mattered.